been since before the global financial crisis.
Question number 9, Dr David Clark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and asks, what responsibility does he take as Minister of Health for his Director-General of Health, who, quote, probably overreached a bit, end quote, as said by him in the House yesterday?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, the responsibilities of ministers and chief executives and the relationship between them is well established. Under the State Sector Act, public service chief executives are employed by the State Services Commissioner, and the Commissioner is responsible for managing their performance in this role. The role of ministers is set out in the Cabinet Manual, which states at paragraph 3.7, ministers decide both the direction of and the priorities for their departments. They are generally not involved in their department's day-to-day operations. The Cabinet Manual applies to the relationship between all ministers and the public service, and of course to my relationship as Minister of Health with Mr Chua as the Director-General of Health.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Does he think it is acceptable that the Director-General of Health, the person in charge of his ministry, does the opposite of what he wanted by telling District Health Board leaders that they could keep the $38 million in funding that they had been incorrectly allocated by his ministry?
The Honourable Dr.
Mr Speaker, we dealt with this yesterday, and what I said at the time is, look, that allocation was a fraction of less than 1% of the total budget, and Mr Chua clearly felt that he could manage that within the $16.8 billion that health receives each year. But as I said yesterday, it was a bit of an overreach. But you've got to look at the wider picture, which is Mr Chua is involved in delivering more and more health services, hundreds of which have improved over the system, delivering 7,000 more doctors, 50,000 more operations, and 150,000 more first specialist assessments.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
Has he asked his Director-General of Health why he told DHBs that they could keep the $38 million wrongly allocated?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Well, Mr Speaker, the focus has actually been on making sure that the error was corrected, and that was my express decision that that should happen.
Point of order. Grant Robertson.
That was a very specific question, Mr Speaker, and I don't believe it was
On
addressed.
this occasion, I will allow the question to be repeated.
Has he asked his Director-General of Health why he told DHBs that they could keep the $38 million wrongly allocated?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
Mr
Coleman.
Speaker, actually all the reports on this have been purely anecdotal, and quite frankly I haven't bothered having that conversation with him because I've been very focused on making sure that the error is corrected, which it has been. And you've got to remember, it's a fraction of less than 1% of the total budget. I'd refer the member over there to the estimates to understand how they...
The question now has definitely been answered. Supplementary question.
Supplementary.
Dr.
Does he take responsibility for the Ministry of Health's failed proposed mental health budget 27 package that was described by Treasury as, quote, an assemblage of bids without an understanding of the mental health population or workforce?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan Coleman.
Mr Speaker, the member knows very well that the government allocated $224 million to mental health in the budget, and that is going to provide a wide range of services which will benefit New Zealanders. I mean, the spending on mental health has increased from $1.3 to $1.4 billion over our time in government, and there's been a decrease in waiting times. There's an extra 150 psychiatrists, an extra 600 mental health nurses, and a general focus on improving access to services.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr David Clark.
What responsibility does he take for the findings of the soon-to-be-released Deloitte report on his ministry's $38 million funding stuff-up to DHBs in light of the fact that it follows another major botch-up worth $18 million for their head office?
The Honourable Dr Jonathan
I
Coleman.
think Parliament's moved past that type of language. We're into positivity now. What I can say is the Deloitte report is being released this afternoon. The member can access one straight after question time, so he should race up to his office. What he'll find is there's some very clear recommendations there around budget process 2018, which I know the member will be very eager to read.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order.
The question was, what responsibility does he take for the findings?
No, that wasn't the question. It was far more emotive than that, and the answer addressed that.
Okay. Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
What responsibility will he take for the findings?
The Honourable Dr. Jonathan Coleman.
Look, the findings are actually relating to the ministry's budget process, and Mr Chua has already taken responsibility for that.
Order. I have a point of order. Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I raise a point of order with regard to your ruling about interim replies on the 26th of July, where you said every endeavour must be made to provide a full reply within the period specified in standing orders. On the 24th of July, I asked a question of the Minister of Health to provide when was the Minister first made aware of concerns held by the Waikato DHB about CEO Nigel Murray's expenses. That question was due yesterday, and the Minister's office gave me an interim reply. I have contacted the Minister's office subsequently and asked for that question, along with a range of others, to be addressed. And as of right now, I still have not had a reply to a question that's pretty simple to answer.
I've heard enough, and I will look into the matter. But I'd be grateful if members, if they have difficulties around receiving answers to written questions, I've advised them, as indeed Sue Moroney advises she has on this case, take it up with the Minister's office first, and then certainly take it up with my office or through the office of the clerk to me. I'll look at it. It's probably not helpful to raise it on the floor of the House as a point of order. Question number... order. We have a further point of order. Mahesh Bindra.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I seek your guidance to find out as to what is the criteria for these unparliamentary words such as stuff up. I just noticed that Dr. Clark used that word stuff up, and you did not stop him, whereas I had used that word during a question time, asking a question of Honourable Sam Lotoinga, and you stopped me immediately and reprimanded me.
Order, as I've said on many times, at the end of the day, I think the members themselves use language for which they are responsible and for which they will be judged by the public of New Zealand for the language they use. Having said that, there are times when, depending on the context in which some words are used and the decorum of the House at the time, I may then intervene. On this occasion, I did not intervene. I think Mr Clark can justify whether, in his own mind, he should have used those words. That's his business. Question number 10, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Primary